Hey guys, Chris here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a really inspirational and interesting story to share with you. I did a podcast with Antonio Ianella. Now I've known Antonio for a few years and I know that he suffered a stroke in Vietnam with his family and he was recovering from a stroke, and he's a creative, he's a musician, but I've never really known the full story until today. So we'll kick it off right now. Hey Antonio, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me, mate.
Learn a little bit about your story, because I know you've just released a book called Saigon Siren, and I know a little pieces of the story. I know about your stroke, I know about your time in London, but I don't really know the full story. So maybe if we start with your childhood, your upbringing, and how you came across music originally.
Sure. I reckon the first introduction to music was in the family home. My sister played the piano accordion. Having an Italian background, that was such a big thing in our family. And just being around that was the initial sort of spark. But then I remember when I began at high school, I was in the music class and I was given the clarinet to play and began playing that for about 3 years, and then moved on to the saxophone. And then sort of around that time of 15, 16, I wanted to get into what was called then audio production and run in a recording studio. So I picked up a guitar as well to learn the basics. Someone suggested that if I'm going to work in a studio, it'd be good to have have the knowledge of guitar playing. So I picked that up and it just began there. And I was introduced to so many different musics, from blues to rock. And yeah, that's around 16, 17 is really when I got serious about it.
Yeah, right. So mum and dad, anyone musical in the house?
Mum sang, but not professionally. She loved singing. But my sister played, like I said, she played the piano accordion for years, and she was really good at it, like when she was quite young, but she never continued. And so really that was the only time we had music in the family home. But like I just remember my childhood has always been creative. I used to love to draw and write and just get lost in that whole imagination thing. And that's music's sort of an extension of that for me.
Any particular artists that, or music artists that you heard when you were younger that made you think, I really want to do that? Or what are some of your early inspirations?
Yeah, early on, I reckon it was Prince. I kind of love that whole sound, him being a guitar player, but also releasing and producing sort of pop kind of. It wasn't pop, it had an R&B rock feel to it. And I just love that collection of musicality and that sort of commercial feel. That's where it began, sort of that kind of interest in. And I sort of fell in love with his whole philosophy on music and how he produced, and he was all hands-on. And I kind of liked that. And then later got into a bit of hard rock, and because around the 80s, hard rock was a big thing, that sort of mid-80s. Hard rock was big. Yeah. So, that was kind of, and then it sort of veered off and I've become a little bit alternative. I really like alternative music, meaning that it's not mainstream. That appeals to me. And I love stuff that's homegrown. What I mean by homegrown, it's kind of, a couple of people, maybe 3 or 4 members coming together and creating a sound. I really enjoy that.
Yeah.
The development of sound.
Yeah, you're right. That mid-80s period was, heavily driven by, your hair metal bands and rock bands, and it started to change towards that late 1980s, early 90s.
Around then, and garage bands, playing in garage bands, and, a couple of mates getting together and jamming. Sort of, playing in the school band. I was in a rock and roll school band playing Bill Haley and the Comets, and I was on saxophone. So that was all the beginnings, the spark, I guess.
Nice. And did you have any aspirations to do anything else career-wise, or was it just music had that effect on you at that early age?
It was, music had a real effect on me in my teens, and like I said, I wanted to work in a studio. That was my thing. I wanted to work in a studio. But once I got playing guitar and got serious about it and started playing in bands, I felt that become my calling, that I wanted to be a pro muso, and mainly in original bands, playing and touring and gigging and making albums. That become my focus. But I always had this love for production and studio recording, hence why we made our own album with the Lion Tamers. It was just something I wanted to do, is create
Yeah.
a recording studio where I can just lose myself in.
As you left school, sort of, 18, 19, 20, where were you then? Were you sort of involved in some bands at that particular point in time, or were you looking for bands? What was happening there?
Yeah, those from about sort of 19 to about 24 was just garage bands, just jamming and doing the odd gig here and there, but it never really got too, I guess, professional. But then I met the third member of the Lion Tamers, which was Mars. I met Mars when I was about 24, and he and I formed an acoustic duo, just playing covers. But we began working 2, 3, 4 nights a week, and all of a sudden I was making a living out of playing music when I was about 24, 25, and he and I gigged everywhere. We did everything from restaurants to festivals and boat cruises, and wherever they would have us, pubs, and played in a lot of iconic Melbourne venues. And yeah, so I did that for a couple of years with Mars.
And so when you were playing with Mars, were you singing or playing guitar, or what was the arrangement there?
I was playing guitar, Mars was singing and playing guitar as well. I was doing backing vocals, and we called ourselves the Braves. And
Yeah.
we just, like I said, we were gigging. We were doing similar to what you've done with your acoustic duo work with Brad.
Did you enjoy that
Yeah,
that slog?
yeah, I did, because it meant that I was just engrossed in music. Everything was about music, gigging, performing, recording. I'd get up in the morning and, well, sometimes early afternoon, because I was gigging at night. And I just lived that lifestyle of being a musician. So it was a really good time. I really enjoyed that whole energy about it.
Yeah. You did a bit of travel, didn't you, after that? You moved over to London
Yes.
for a little bit? What inspired you to make the move over there?
It was generally because my love for music, especially British rock. Beatles were a big influence on me. And I was heavily into songwriting about that time. So I was sort of 23, 24, 25 years old, getting into songwriting. And so I wanted to travel as well. So I backpacked through Southeast Asia, into parts of Middle East, and doing a bit of busking. So I was with a friend of mine, and he sang and we'd busk and just sort of weave our way through those parts of the world and into Europe. And then I ended up in London, and that's where I wanted to stay and just form some kind of band and keep making music.
And was that
That's
just
what
because
drove me there.
And is it just because, obviously, or like you said, the British rock influences that you were having at the time, and just the knowledge that London is kind of the capital of a lot of that over there, and you just wanted to be in the centre of it? Is that what it was?
Yes, that's what it was. I just don't know. I had this crazy idea that I wanted to go to London, form a band, gig, make music. It was just some kind of drive. I can't even say exactly it was this or that. It was just something I felt I wanted to do. Experience life and do something different rather than just, working and day by day. I wanted to have some adventure, experience new things, meet new people, travel. Once you're in London, your access to Europe, and it's on your doorstep, so you can travel quite easily and go to various countries for a weekend. So that was part of the attraction of being in London and gigging and performing and writing songs, and that was the thing.
And you mentioned the Beatles and your love for the British rock. When did you discover the Beatles, and what other British type bands did you discover that influenced that move there, and also the type of music you were listening to at the time?
When I started doing the Braves with Mars, doing the acoustic duo, we did a lot of Beatles songs in our set, and he began to introduce me not only the popular Beatles songs, but a lot of the album tracks that I hadn't really heard, and just the creativity of the diverse songwriting styles. If you listen to some of those albums, like I think you did a podcast on Abbey Road, and I re-listened to that album after watching that. it's just the songs just go on this journey, and it could be, from like, I think that's the White Album. There's Rocky Raccoon, and then there'll be, Sergeant Pepper. They're just so extreme, those songs, and I just love that whole idea. So Beatles, and then there was a bit later on, Radiohead really appealed to me. The Rolling Stones, Blur, those type of Oasis, those kind of bands were just. I felt like that's the kind of music I wanted to make. Pink
Yeah.
Floyd.
Yeah. What was it about the British, I guess, sensibility of the music? Was there anything? Was it just a coincidence that that's just sort of what you gravitated to?
I reckon there was something in the content of the lyrics and the energy. It was some kind of like this suppression on society that affected the music that they produced. There was this sense, what I felt while I was in Europe, in London, there was this sense that it's such an old country, and it's run by, I guess, it has a conservative element to it. If you look at the royal family, so it's very proper. But there was this underground tone of people wanting to break out and change that and create music that reflected that, and that's what appealed to me, was just that. I guess that force against repression and normality, and that was the appeal.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I've never thought
Pushing
about
the
it like that,
norms.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've never thought about the British music in that form, but yeah, you're right. It's amazing. Yeah, so you're in London. You're obviously wanting to make a bit of a name for yourself. You're meeting new people. Did you start a band there, or did you have any success with that endeavour?
Yeah, I did. I met a guy named Ainsley Charlton. He's a singer, songwriter, played acoustic guitar, and he and I had just met around 1997, just so long ago. And we created this little band. We called ourselves Ursha Bloom. And for a big part of the 5 years of the band, the span of the band, the first 2 or 3 years, it was mainly he and I just working as a duo songwriter, singer-songwriter sort of concept. And we were gigging a lot around London, sometimes playing down in the in Piccadilly Circus, the tube train station, down in the belly of that.
Oh,
And then
wow.
we'll be gigging everywhere and anywhere. And after about a year of doing that, we signed a little recording deal with a big publishing house. And through that recording deal, we were able to record effectively our single. So we did that, and it was a great time because we got to. I guess I was living that dream. I'm in London, wanting to
Yeah.
achieve something in music, and then suddenly we were in this high end recording studio that was built in an old, Edwardian Victorian home over 3 levels, and so the control room was at the top. You had the middle room was one sound booth, and then in the basement there was the other sound booth where you would record like maybe drums and stuff. So that whole buzz of being in the studio, we had a producer and there was an engineer, and I played quite a few of the instruments through the recording because we didn't have a band. It was just myself and Ains. The producer was a drummer from Shakin' Stevens times, and
Okay. Yeah.
he played drums on the track. I played a bit of bass. We did some string arrangements, and we recorded a couple of tracks. And one of them was to be our single.
Wow. So that must have felt great. You're over there. You're making it. You got a name for yourself. Were you called Ursha Bloom in the beginning? You had that name picked out, or was it
Yeah,
just
Ursha Bloom.
yeah,
I don't,
yeah,
yeah, I don't know. Just like we don't even know how that name came about. I think we're brainstorming names, and we had a list of 2 words. We were thinking we had this idea to put 2 words together, and we made a
yeah,
list. And maybe on one list there was Bloom, and the word Ursha. I don't even know what it means. It's spelled you when you put Ursha and Bloom together. It's spelled Urshablom. Ursha
yeah,
Bloom. And it just felt right, and we went with that, and that became our name
yeah.
for the 5 years.
Yeah, it's a great name. It's so unique, but it gives off a certain vibe when you say it. So you had some success there, and you recorded a couple of albums, or one album, or
We recorded an EP, but the EP was a produced EP. We had the single when we signed with the label. We had the single and an additional track, and the single was used on some TV programs and some outros, and they chopped up. You know how they do. You know when you watch a sports show and they have music that might be a compilation of a track that's chopped up, and it's just the instrumental section. So they did that with one of the track, and then they had the single on a TV program, and then a couple of years went by, and we ended up putting together a 4-piece band, and we recorded our own self-produced album in our own little rehearsal space using our own equipment, and that's how we made our EP.
So that's great. And you toured a little bit with that EP as well?
Yeah, we just played mainly gigging through London, and it was really cool, Chris. We played at a lot of venues where Led Zeppelin played at, where the Stones played at. And that was a really good buzz. You'd be there and you knew that Zeppelin played here 20 years ago. Yeah. Like there's a pub in Fulham called the King's Head, which was notorious for all those bands that played at. And so we were doing that, just gigging all over the place, everywhere and anywhere they would have us, we'd play. Sometimes we'd play as a duo, acoustic duo. Sometimes it would be a 4-piece band with a drummer and a bass player. Towards the end, the band become really tight, and we had a really good sound. But it's a hard slog. London's a hard slog for bands. There's so many bands.
Yeah, I imagine it would be. It'd be a bit of a hard slog out there. So I guess that's kind of what I know about you, and then I know you ended up going to Vietnam at some point. Fill in the gap between your time in London there and obviously making it over to Vietnam on a family holiday. Can you fill in the gap there? What sort of happened between that period?
Yeah, so I was back home. I left London by that stage. I was back home in Melbourne and was married, had a couple of kids, 3 daughters. And we were on at that time, I wasn't doing music full time. It just sort of shifted from being a career to sort of on the side. And I was on a family holiday with my 3 daughters and their mother. And just out of the blue, I had a massive brain hemorrhage in the shape of a stroke. And it came out of the blue. There was no pre-warning, no signs, apart from that morning, I did feel something, but other than that, my health was always been good. I've never been in hospital. It just, like I said, come out of the blue and left me paralyzed within 10 minutes.
Yeah, wow. And look, coming from someone that obviously hears about stroke, is there any signs or is there anything that you now look back on and you sort of think, maybe I was doing this that contributed to having the stroke, or it was just a complete out of the blue thing?
There was a little sign about 30 minutes before, but I'll have to explain the kind of stroke I had. Stroke is a bit of an umbrella term, and there's many different types of strokes that people can have. But effectively, when you break down what I had something called an artery vein malformation. So I had a brain hemorrhage, but because stroke is such a big umbrella, it falls under that umbrella. And it's a lot easier to say stroke than to say an artery vein malformation, because most people don't know what that is. I didn't know what it was. So basically, I was born with a vein in my brain that was weak. So artery vein malformation. So that, kind of explains that a weak vein in my brain that just bled out of the blue, no pre-warning, no signs of ill health. In fact, when it happened, and I was completely paralyzed and I was losing the ability to speak and my vision was blurred and my hearing was all distorted, when they rushed me to a clinic, because we were in a little village about to enter into underground war tunnels, and that's when it occurred, right just before we were about to go into the tunnels. And so they rushed me to a local clinic. They had to drag me because I lost everything. I lost complete function. They had to drag me. A couple of people dragged me onto the tour bus. The tour bus took me to a clinic, and the doctors were checking over me, and they couldn't find anything because they're like, my blood pressure was fine, my I didn't have high sugar, blood sugar. My heart rate was good. They couldn't work out because normally there's a sign, some kind of sign that shows
Yeah.
that there's something going on, but I had no signs. So they had to rush me to from that little village, which was about an hour and a half out of Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon, and into a hospital straight in for an MRI, immediate MRI. And that's when they discovered that I had the artery vein malformation, which was a bleed, and it happened in my brain stem.
Wow. So that malformation,
Yeah, so
you always had that? Is it some sort of not a hereditary thing, but you were
yeah,
born like that? You just
no,
never
I was
knew
just
that it was.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was born with it, and apparently, statistically, a lot of people are born with this AVM, but it doesn't affect them. But if
Mhm.
it does bleed, statistically, it happens between the ages of 30 and 40. And I was
Yep.
38 when it happened to me. So I fell in that sort of statistical range.
Wow.
But yeah, it's a rare condition, meaning that only like 1% of the global population are struck with an AVM that
Yeah.
causes, similar to what happened to me. And in fact, because I had mine in my brain stem, which is, your brain stem is about this wide. And because I had mine in my brain stem, what I learned as I was going through the recovery process, that like only 1 in 5 people who have brain stem strokes survive.
Wow. Okay.
And
Gee.
even narrowing that down, a percentage of that 1%, most of them are left with, like forever, you know, without ability to walk or talk or see, something quite, a serious disability. Whereas I have some disabilities, but I function quite well.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And so that's obviously a massive thing to be happening to you. The initial recovery from for the hospital to let you out and everything was how long was that?
I was in hospital for close to 3 months.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
in that rehab period of rehabilitation in hospital, I went from complete paralyzed and to walking out of hospital,
Oh wow.
and my vision settled. I was able to see again, and my hearing adjusted. And it took about I don't know, about a month or two for my speech to return. I still have a few problems with my speech. I get some tingling on my lips, and sometimes I'm not able to find the words that I want to express. So little things like that, but generally
Yeah.
manageable. So 2.5 months or close to 3 months in rehab, and then, like you said, it continues. I still, 15 years down the track, I'm still doing therapy and
Yeah.
physio and occupational therapy. Always trying to improve and maintain as well.
So you're in Vietnam and this major thing happens, and you take that time to recover in hospital. You come back home. What's going through your mind in terms of your future, and how do you deal with, I guess, the mental recovery from what's happened?
Good question. To get home from Vietnam, there was a rescue flight because I was in ICU in Vietnam, and then after about 10 days, a rescue flight got me home to Melbourne. That's when my rehab began. But that's a real good question because a lot of people don't ask about the mental recovery. For me, and many people I know who've been through a brain injury, recovering from a brain injury, the mental recovery takes even longer than the physical one because you just all of a sudden let's say it happens when you're 40 or 38 for me. You've spent your whole adult life achieving things and becoming who you are, and then all
Yeah.
of a sudden that's just taken away from you. You can't function, you can't use your hands, you can't walk. Some people
Yeah.
have their memories affected. They can't remember what they did or who they were. Their speech is affected. So it's the physical recovery is something that we all try to achieve, but the mental recovery, it tends to linger. Well, it did for me, and it took years for me to sort of find, I guess, a balance on who I am now. It took me a long time to just become a new person, and I had to work at that. It wasn't just something that happened. I had continuously had to work at that. I had little things like learn how to play the piano instead of I was a guitar player. So what am I going to do now? How am I going
Mm.
to make music? okay, I'm going to play one-handed piano. So just finding a path that enabled me to get back to some kind of who I was, I guess, and
Yeah,
going, going through the depression, anxiety, and yeah, that was a big
yeah,
challenge.
yeah. And I guess what role do you think music played in helping you move through that?
Music saved my life. Once what began to happen when I was in hospital in rehab, I began to sort of look at my life and think, okay, I've been a musician since I was a kid, and for the last few years I wasn't doing music as much as I would have liked to. So I was confronted with, all of a sudden my life has changed. I can't go back to what I was doing before, but maybe I can get back to music. Maybe that can be my passion again. So while I was in hospital, I remember going through this, I guess, a transition where I started to think about, okay, I've written these songs that I had sitting around for years. I'm going to finish those songs. So I began to frame music into what my new life was going to be. But I just had to find a way to do that. So music played such a big part in that of my recovery, because it gave me a purpose, something to work towards.
Yeah, wow. And I suppose the limitations that you did have in recovering from the stroke there, like you just said, put a framework around what you should focus on because of the ability of what you could do at the time.
Yeah, that was it. Like I had a bunch of songs that I had written, and they weren't finished. They were roughly recorded on some equipment I had, but they weren't finished. And so I just began to think, okay, how can I finish these songs? How can I, get back to making music? And it began with, well, this piano here, just tinkering about and playing little melodies and trying to find a way that I can make music again and get into production and recording, and just focusing, as well as looking after my health and making sure that I was recovering and I was getting better and I was doing my physiotherapy. But I found, because I was working before my stroke, and then all of a sudden I had all this time, and recovery, you might spend a couple of hours a day doing rehab and physiotherapy or occupational therapy or whatever, hydrotherapy. But then you had the rest of the day to fill. And, I just channeled that time and energy into somehow learning to make music again. And that did wonders, Chris, for my mental health, because it enabled me to step out of the mentality of being a victim, rather than just always, for me, I needed to have separation from living through this trauma and having a life. Because what I was finding through my recovery, everything was about the recovery, and the therapists, they were fantastic, but a lot of things were based around, oh, you can do that, and that'll help with your recovery. Oh, while you're having dinner, try to use your left hand that's been affected to eat. That'll help with your recovery. Or when you're doing the dishes, use your left hand to scrub a plate. So everything became about recovery. And I believe that is very important, but I also believe that sometimes you need to step out of the recovery mentality and live a life, because you kind of lose yourself a little bit through the recovery process. So that's how music saved my life. It gave me that opportunity to, once I stepped into my little recording equipment that I had set up, I'd leave stroke behind and just make music. That makes any sense.
Yeah, music has that just absolute power to do that. That's
It
amazing.
does,
That's an amazing story. And so
anything creative.
Anything creative, you're right. It does have that ability to just take you away from the world and almost
Absolutely,
almost like a meditation.
That's the drive for people who do it. It's just that it's like yoga or meditation. You're so present, and and I know we've had this conversation many times over the years that we've known each other, that it's just this calling, and once you're in that headspace, the world outside could just stand still. And do you remember those times when we were recording the album, and it'd be me, you, and Mars, and we were literally in this space that I'm in right now, and we were making music, and I don't know, just time stood still. things were happening, and we just didn't. We were just so engrossed in what we were making.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was. I remember those times fondly, and I guess with the exception of obviously the Boy Cried Wolf, it sort of brings us up to that time in your life. Obviously, you had a period there where you did record some songs with another group called Boy Cried Wolf, where you wrote the majority of the songs and liaised with those guys. And then I think you and I met after that, Tony. I think I was working in real estate, and I might have met you on a house appraisal, and we
Yep,
connected over music.
yep,
And yeah, you're right. It was on Thursday nights. Yes, it was you, myself, and Mars would
yep,
get together as the Lion Tamers, and your songs were the basis of what we were recording. And yeah, that was some really great times. You know, you're exactly right. We sort of lost ourselves in the moment there on a Thursday night. It almost wasn't long enough, you know, when we got together, because it just felt like we were chipping away at something great, but it was, you know, almost took a long time, because we'd only get
yeah,
together for those, well, sort of maybe 3 or 4 hours
yep.
on the
3
Thursday
hours
night
on
there.
a,
But
and we just get together every week, and we didn't have enough time. You're right, 3 or 4 hours, and yeah, it took a long time to make that album because of that.
it did, but I think it was a great exercise. And just given what you've explained with your songwriting and your inspiration from the Beatles, you know, the British bands like Radiohead, I really sense that in your songwriting and the way that you put those songs together.
Yeah,
But when we recorded them, obviously, it had my vocals on them and Mars's vocals, and all three of us, we created
yeah,
this sound, which was quite unique, and quite unique for me. I was used to playing sort of rock songs and your typical standard stuff, and it was quite a unique experience putting those songs together.
whenever
Yeah,
I had a song idea, it might only be some chords and maybe a verse and a bit of a chorus. I'd call you up, and you'd come over from, during your break at work, and you'd come over and we'd bash this song out. We'd just, hey man, I've got this new song. You'd be the first person I'd call. Hey, I've got a new song. And you'd come. Sometimes I had two new songs. And I remember you saying to me, where do these songs come from? And I'm like, I don't know.
yeah,
They just, something just channels through me.
yeah,
I don't know. They come and I just sit down at the piano, and they write themselves. But so, I'd have the nucleus of a song, and it might be a verse and a chorus and maybe a little bit of something else. But then when the three of us got together and we just sit around this piano with you two playing guitars and singing, and we just build it into what it was. So it was a real collaboration. Maybe the songs were
yeah,
there, but we built them together. And we, because of our each of us had, remember there was 3 decades between us, because Mars is a bit older than me. I'm a bit
yeah,
older than you. So we all had different influences. So sometimes Mars would say, oh, I can hear that being a Queen, or that's got to feel like maybe David Bowie. And
yeah,
then
yeah,
I'd be like, maybe we can try this idea here on this part. It feels a bit like Radiohead. And then you'd come in and say, I hear that as like Soundgarden. So between the three of us, we
yeah,
just
yeah.
venture from, because if you listen to the album, there's a real heavy song, that Ball and Chain. And then
Mm,
straight after Ball and Chain, there's an acoustic driven song. And
yeah,
then there's
yeah,
one
very
later on that's got some horns, and, it changes time from 4/4 to 3/4. So we just
yeah,
played around
yeah.
those ideas and had no barrier in what we wanted to create, rather than just create.
Yeah, I think that was the main thing, was the no barrier. You know, I was always used to working within a framework of, okay, this is rock or country or whatever. But the thing about the Tamers was there was, yeah, literally no barrier at
It
all.
wasn't.
Which was really great. And from a musical point of view, it just gave you that sense of freedom that you could add kind of whatever you wanted, which is really
Exactly,
cool.
yeah. But, like
Yeah,
when I listen to the album from time to time, I don't hear it as it not working. It still feels cohesive. It still feels like each song is connected to the other song.
yeah.
You might hear a heavy rock song, and then there might be something that's a bit more groove orientated, but they don't feel disconnected. They still feel it's like the Lion Tamers making music.
Yeah, and look, I've got to admit, I saw one of your posts recently about the book about Saigon Siren, and you did put up the link to the album Lost Translation, and also we were sort of halfway through recording another album, which there's some songs available for that as well. But I remember listening to Lost Translation, and I hadn't heard it in years, a long time, and I just was amazed at how diverse. And I say this about a lot of great albums because I do some album reviews, but this album, it is quite diverse. The songs are so different, and I think because we took so long to create the album, it really shows. But I was going to ask you, I mean, you were kind of I guess we sort of the maestro in terms of coordinating the structure of the songs, and like, where do you think you got that from? Do you think it's from those early listenings to the Beatles and Radiohead? Because the structure and the tempo changes, and it's quite unique with what we created.
Yeah, definitely. What you said there, Radiohead and the Beatles. It's playing around with time signatures. I like that idea of playing around with time signatures and going from it being a 4/4 time to a 3/4, then back to 4/4, or maybe
Yeah,
one song would be in a 6/8 time, the next one will be a 4/4 time. And I know for people who are not musical that may not make any sense, but I was learning through songwriting and using tempos they help with the mood. And if you tie into, like, the lyrical content might be something dark, so a 6/8 fill, it tends to have, which is almost like a box trot. It has that tension about it, and it
yeah,
helps relay what the song's about. So I was
yeah.
focusing on those things and just trying to be unique as well, and taking it in a different direction, and seeing what happens. And so I was just pushing those boundaries. But yeah,
Yeah, look, it was definitely a great experience, and from my point of view, I learned a lot about songwriting from working with yourself, and just the ritual of preparing the song, understanding the structure, and that recording, I guess, process. I learned a lot from, and as you know, obviously, I then after that went off and recorded some music of my own. But I see that period of recording as sort of the precursor to allowing me to then go and write songs myself and move
yeah.
forward. So you obviously have always wanted to write a book about your experience, and you have just written this book, Saigon Siren, and it's just been released. So tell me a little bit about that process of writing. How long did it take, and how are you finding the release of it now?
Yeah, the writing took so long. Like, it took 12 years, but not obviously 12 years, not full time. I wrote the first draft before the Lion Tamers, and so I wrote the first draft, and after the first draft, I put it aside to just sort of, I guess, detach myself a little bit from it, with the intention to pick it up again and start writing and have fresh eyes after
Yeah.
a period away from the book. That was the advice that other writers were giving me.
Yep.
But that's about the time when I was just going to show. Then the Lion Tamers started at about that time. So
Yeah.
the book
Yeah.
was parked to the side with the intention, oh, I've got to get back into the book. And then a friend of mine asked if I could perform at a photographic exhibition, if I put some kind of band together to do that. And I went, oh,
Yes.
yeah, I can do that. So I only had met you, and I knew
Mm.
Mars for years. And I just rang you and I rang Mars. I go, hey, you want to do a gig? And we went,
Yeah.
okay, yeah, let's get
I remember
together.
that.
So we got
Yeah.
together and started jamming. Yeah, we did. The first thing we did was a gig, well, a small little art gallery gig,
Yes.
acoustic, just two
Yes.
guitars and my piano.
Yeah. I did skip over
And
that.
that's
So
where it
you're
began, the
right.
Lion
That's how
Tamers.
it
And
began. Yeah.
yeah, we didn't really have any intention to keep going. It was just to do the gig. But it was
Yeah. Yeah.
such a great night. We had so much fun. And I think I had only a couple of song ideas at that time. I don't think we even
Yeah.
had many songs. And then
That's
we
right.
just began jamming and recording, and it just started to feel like, oh wow, this is really sounding really good. And we just continued. So there was never, hey, let's put a band together and make an album. It was more like it just evolved organically. And then after all those
Yeah.
years, I was going to show you this before, that's the
Oh,
album we
yeah.
made. And
Yes.
so
Yeah,
basically,
that
getting back to what the question,
absolutely. Yeah.
so it was
Yeah.
the lion tamers that divided the writing of the book in half. Because once
Yeah.
we started doing the tamers, the book all of a sudden it just slipped into the background. It was like, yeah, I'm going to finish that book one
That's
day.
right. I remember
But I was having
you were
so
partly
much,
through
there
it.
was so
Yeah.
much,
We were just
yeah.
commenting before. Have you got a
And,
copy of the book
and
there?
then I do, yes, of course.
We were just commenting on the similarity to the artwork of the Tamers album and the Saigon
Yeah,
Siren cover. So yeah,
yeah, I
there is some
put them
similarity there.
together.
And
So yeah, you
we were
can
sort of,
see that. So this
yeah,
hand, yeah, that was this the artwork I created myself. It's a sketch. It's a portrait. Just subconsciously, obviously, the colors appeal to me, and they just
mm,
transferred into the book design. And we only as I put them together earlier when we were talking, I just realized, oh, look at that. They're very similar in colors.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it was the lion tamers that paused the book, the continuation of the book. And then during COVID, I was kind of like everyone, we had such heavy lockdowns. That's when I picked up the book again and began
yeah,
writing, which effectively began a whole rewrite because that time apart, 5 years apart from the book, when I reread it, it didn't feel right. It felt like
yeah,
I just
yeah,
didn't capture the story. So I literally just started again and spent then probably about a good year, solid year of writing, sort of partly into COVID 21, maybe 2 years, a year in editing and back and forth with an editor, and then getting it published.
yeah. I mean,
Long journey, but
it's a
it's
long
been a
journey, and it's a fascinating story of what you've been through. And thanks for coming on and sharing it. But in terms of the book, how can people pick up a copy of the book? What's the best way?
you can find it on Amazon. But I encourage people just to go to my website. So if you Google Saigon Siren, this is the easiest way to find my website. If you Google Saigon Siren, my website will come up in the listing. And through my website, you'll not only be able to find the best place to buy the book, like Amazon, whichever country you're in, it has the links, but you'll also be able to listen to the Lion Tamers, Boy Crow Wolf, Ursula Bloom, and put it all together. Because everything for me, from the book to the albums, the writing, the recording, they all tie together. It's just like this whole patchwork of creativity. It's not one thing doesn't connect with the other. They're all connected. So even the website, it's very immersive. You can get a feel through it and you get an idea of the story. There's some sample chapters on my website. Yeah, it's all there. That's the best
Beautiful.
way to get to the book.
Awesome. And I'll put the link in the notes of this video as well. And
Sure.
you're definitely right, Tone.
Yeah.
With obviously my experience with a lot of the songs we wrote there, they're all got little clues and they all tie in together. So visit the website, guys, and check out the albums. You won't be disappointed. But Tone, thanks for coming on the podcast, mate. It's been great to have a chat and hear your story.
Cheers,
And
Chris. Thank you so much, mate.
you're welcome, mate. And we'll catch you soon. Cheers.
Cool, buddy. See you, mate. Bye. Thanks.